Hello, guys and gals, me Mutahar, and ladies and gentlemen, Logan Paul does some winning. Now, I like to cover these stories, especially when it comes to influencer stuff, and especially when it comes to some of the shadier things that are happening in the circuit. Now, one of the things that obviously I'm sure a lot of you guys know if you watch my channel, if you just kept up in the space, Cryptozoo is a gaming project that Logan Paul was behind. And this project spectacularly failed. In fact, it failed so bad that it ended up involving multiple lawsuits, and it was really just a game that kind of caught the train of that big NFT wave. You know, the wave that nobody talks about these days because NFTs are effectively functionally dead. Most of those NFTs, I think the average, if you take them, the market crash is like 99.9%. Now look, obviously, back 3 years ago, there were influencers telling me, Muta, you're a fucking idiot. How could you even think NFTs aren't going to go to the moon? They are absolutely not at the moon. Now, Cryptozoo was a huge gaming project, a Web3 project, which if you look into it, it was basically a game that Logan Paul was kind of working on. And this game basically involved the capture and the hatching of eggs, right? Eggs where, animals were, these Cryptozoo animals were sort of coming out. So animals like a panda and a cat equaling a panda cat. Now, this is a legendary Cryptozoo, and it would yield 47,000 zoo tokens a day, which would be a crypto token attached to the zoo project. Now, what did this panda cat look like? Well, this is it right here, ladies and gentlemen. Poorly photoshopped panda cat would basically be the progenitor to the artificial intelligence craze. I'm telling you right now, if this game came out a couple years later with generative AI being as good as it is, even locally on my system, as I was yapping, I generated a realistic looking animal that resembles a koala and a giraffe right over here through a simple model that I actually grabbed. Of course, the model isn't perfect. When I tell it to make cat dog from Nickelodeon, it generates this. So your mileage may absolutely vary. But for Cryptozoo, the actual game is pretty much non-existent. Going to its website now, or at least trying to, resolves in absolutely nothing. It was to a point that even the fans surrounding Cryptozoo, this is not really a fan project, but people created Real Zoo, which was obviously the game released as an actual playable title. In fact, released so hard that it has a whole bunch of features that Cryptozoo has not thrown in yet. In fact, from what it seems is they're working towards version 0.77, and they might even launch with version 1.0. Now, there was obviously a fair bit of controversy surrounding this. One of the biggest things was investigation by a friend of the channel, Coffeezilla. Coffee covered the Cryptozoo project 2 years ago in a series of videos, starting off with investigating Logan Paul's biggest scam, which is basically looking into Cryptozoo and just what it was. Basically, the amount of delays this project had gone through, the lack of materialization of the most basic functionalities of the game. But there were obviously a lot of clips that people had dug into where Logan kind of talks about this project himself. So I want you guys to listen to this right now. I would say the idea, Logan, was actually not that good, simply because Logan probably ended up losing more money just through legal actions and all the backlash faced through this. But that's for a different part of the video. Now, I don't know why he keeps comparing Cryptozoo to like Pokemon. Like, Pokemon is a game where you can clearly play it and there's actual battling to it. Like, there's an actual capture mechanic. I think he just looked at the daycare from Pokemon and thought, man, maybe we can make a whole fucking game out of it. Forget the whole battling shit, right? Where you're actually looking at tight matchups and things like that. No, I feel like comparing Cryptozoo to Pokemon is just insulting to the hard work that Game Freak does, which in comparison to Cryptozoo is actually very difficult. You can say a lot about fucking Game Freak nowadays, but at least they're shipping actual games, all right? Unlike this vaporware that never fucking actually materialized at all. But look, man, there's a lot of people that believe Logan Paul. They're like, hold on a minute, you telling me this game can make money? And I think that was where it stuck with some individuals. There were investors entirely in this situation where they threw money into this project, and not only did they throw money into this project, but they somehow lost to the tune of like 33,000 pounds. I don't know how you actually decide that maybe I'll put in that much fucking money to a game, a crypto game of all things, it could be made by the nicest influencer in the world. Unfortunately, cryptocurrency, at least when it comes to a lot of these shit coins, these games, these memes, is really just a bubble where, again, it's always the influencer that peddles this dog shit to you because they know if they do it successfully, they're not the last one out holding the bags, right? That's basically the strategy involved here. Now, again, I personally think that if you're stupid enough to lose 33,000 fucking pounds in a game about cryptozoos, then, I don't know, there's almost like a point where I have sympathy for people, but then it quickly runs out when I see stupid shit like this. But then again, that being said, I don't think projects like this should really exist without proper safeguards in place. So of course, obviously, a while later down the road, he ends up announcing some of the actual remediations regarding Cryptozoo, because obviously it was a failed project. These things involved with him delivering on the promise to buy back base eggs and base animal Cryptozoo NFTs. So if you basically put your money into this situation, you could actually go to a site called eggnftbuyback.com. Now this website isn't accessible, but thankfully I covered this at the time, so at least I have some archives available. And obviously, one of the issues with something like this came out to what was posted on the website. So for instance, lawyers came in and pointed out the waiver of claims and release. By accepting the terms of the buyback, you acknowledge and agree that you're waiving any actual or anticipated claims against Paul, as well as against any related personnel, affiliates, agents, partners, employees, service providers, or representatives. But so basically the point of this is that, listen, we'll give you your money back, but here's a, waiver of claims and release, so you can't take any, lawsuit going forward, which, obviously looks really shitty. And, in ethicality's sake, it kind of is, but he is ultimately paying people back in, I guess, whatever value they ended up giving, at least for those initial eggs. So he approached the Cryptozoo project like everything else he's passionate about, I guess putting 5 fucking minutes into it, and only the best possible intentions and success for everyone who shared our vision. I never made a single penny from the project. In fact, the opposite is true, because I spent hundreds of thousands of dolans trying to make it back, trying to make it happen. With this buyback program, I personally committed more than $2.3 million to buy back the base eggs and the base animals. So, as I said a year ago, Cryptozoo was derailed by bad actors. Now, who are these bad actors in question, ladies and gentlemen? Well, the bad actors he would bring up in a 25-page lawsuit right over here. So this is where, again, you had Logan Paul against Eduardo Ibanez and Jake Greenbaum, aka the Crypto King. Now, if you don't know who the Crypto King is, there's a video that I did probably like 3 years ago. It was a big thing. There was a channel called Dumb Money. There still is a channel. And basically, at the time, these Pokemon cards were like, these Pokemon-like cards were really, really popular. They still are. But cracking them open, like cracking these boxes open for that really, really rare $100,000 card was sort of the in thing, right? Like, people with serious money and no connection to Pokemon decided to throw money into this situation. So obviously with Jake Greenbaum, he was on one of these live streams and it was a hilarious mess, one that I would highly recommend if you care about it. Go back and watch one of my original videos on it, or just get the gist of it really just by looking it up, okay? It really is, he knew ahead of time working with these people on a project like this was probably a no-no answer, okay? If I knew that the Crypto King, the guy who has millions of videos bringing up how dog shit he is, probably wouldn't be associating with him on a business project at all, especially a crypto project. But Logan Paul, in the infinite wisdom that he had here, decided that, yeah, I'm going to put my fucking money with these guys. I'm going to actually work with them. And so it all ended with, again, Logan Paul throwing a lawsuit at these guys. And of course, they bring it up over here too, like Logan Paul's a globally recognized entertainer, athlete, and entrepreneur. So again, he brings up who he is. He identifies an opportunity to become one of the first public figures to develop and launch an NFT in the burgeoning digital asset market. So of course, that project becomes Cryptozoo. He considered Cryptozoo a passion project, although he hoped and anticipated the project would eventually be profitable. So he recognized that he lacked the technical skill to build and launch Cryptozoo himself. Mr. Paul assembled a team of purported specialists. He got the Crypto King King is he basically generated the Avengers of scumbags to work on this project. Now, Mr. Greenbaum and Mr. Ibanez promoted themselves to Mr. Paul as experts who possessed the specialized knowledge and expertise necessary to develop and launch the game. So he touts himself as a crypto NFT expert who could oversee and consult on all blockchain-related aspects of the project. So the thing about this is obviously this is also not his first foray into cryptocurrency, and that is Logan Paul, that is, right? Obviously, if you look at some of his other history, he's got situations regarding Dink Doink coin, or Dink Doink token, which is a meme coin, a shit coin that obviously went nowhere, pretty much aped South Park for the most of it, and really was just a project that, again, showcased that even before Cryptozoo, he kind of knew the space. He kind of knew the market for what it was. And so obviously, when he started to sue everybody else inside a circle, these are all questions where anybody could have said, listen, you should have fucking known the kind of snakes you were laying with, okay? These guys were not ideal stewards of this project. And ultimately, it's not just, I would say it's not just Logan Paul's fault that the project failed, but obviously it's everyone else involved into it. But, you know, if this is your passion project, okay, the last thing I would let anyone near my passions is the goddamn crypto king himself, okay? That's just insane stupidity on your part, dude. Now, one of the investigators involved into this was Coffeezilla. He was the one that really broke this story for what it was, and, you know, after a while, Logan Paul would kind of apologize, or at least, like, mention him a little bit, you know, come up with this buyback thing. I wouldn't even really say it's an apology, rather more of a admission, or like an acknowledgement, really. But of course, obviously, that all was null and fucking void because later then he started to sue Coffeezilla for defamation. Now, defamation is a pretty serious, case. It's a pretty serious civil situation in the United States where, again, when it comes to big public figures, it's often very difficult to win, right? Usually, these cases go on for years. They can cost a lot of money, right? I talked to Coffee like a few months ago about this, and it really was just like one of those like lawsuits where obviously the legal world moves incredibly slow, and when it comes to the amount of money both sides are shelling, obviously whatever money Coffee could have made through his investigations completely went out the fucking window because, again, getting sued sucks. It's expensive, it's costly, and it's very time consuming. And for somebody like Logan Paul who's doing the suing, it's also not a cheap endeavor either. So clearly both sides were kind of just throwing money into a fire pit. Not really a fire pit, just giving it effectively to lawyers that were basically making the actual payday involved with this entire situation. But of course, it wasn't just the Coffeezilla lawsuit that was the important part about it. The reason why Logan Paul technically quote-unquote won this is because there was another lawsuit involved in the story too. One that we did cover at the time. So the one lawsuit that we're looking at over here is Holland versus Cryptozoo. So to give you guys an idea of the complaint in this situation, rather, we're going to actually read it for you and take you back. Again, this is more of a class action affair where obviously Don Holland, on behalf of other similarly situated, were against Cryptozoo. And of course, they mention Daniel Strobel, Jeffrey Levin, Eduardo Ibanez, the Crypto King, and Ben Roth. But what they say over here is that the defendants executed a rug pull, which is a colloquial term used to describe a scheme in which an NFT developer solicits funds from prospective NFT purchasers, promising them certain benefits. Once the purchasers' funds are used to purchase the NFTs, the developers abruptly abandon the project and fail to deliver the promised benefits, all while fraudulently retaining the purchasers' funds. So there's a lot of stuff to really assume from this, and they do bring up a lot of these Discord messages that Logan Paul was in. So for instance, Mr. Paul, or someone acting on his behalf, posted messages to the Cryptozoo community confirming the exclusion of consumers who had already sold CZ NFTs from the reward program. Logan Paul, what will happen to people who sold everything at a loss? Just current owners. If you sell, you lose. Common investing knowledge. And of course, Logan over here, when somebody mentions the word investing, goes, "Look at that, boys! Look at that!" Probably shouldn't be pointing to it. But of course, Logan also says over here, please do not put any more money into Cryptozoo. And of course, one user says he's probably saying, hey, I'm sick of you guys blaming your investment decisions on me, so I'm putting it in writing. Don't buy any more. But that's just my guess. To which Logan goes, 2 pointers up. I will no longer be the scapegoat for anyone's financial decisions. Now, to an extent, I kind of do agree a little bit with Logan Paul, right? Like, again, for a lot of people who were looking at this project and thought, you know what, maybe I can 100x my money. At some point, I kind of see the line between crypto investor and degenerate gambler completely blurred in this situation. But even then, as a content creator, when you're promoting a product or running something like this, any product where you're taking money in for a speculative asset, like I'll just say it right now, especially if you're a content creator, it's something that you should stay away from, especially with something like cryptocurrency, which has this insane track record of 99.9% losses on average with most of these dog shit coins. Even when you have the biggest names attached to the project, as long as those names stop promoting the project very regularly, it just completely falters and fails. I have yet to personally see any successful crypto game or project. So, you know, whether it be Logan Paul or whether it be the president of the United fucking States, these crypto projects all end up going down the garbage chute the same way, okay? Lack of promotion, thing dies, right? And if the game isn't actually fun or substantial to play, if the game feels like something that could have been made for free, which it seems that it has, and it just has this unnecessary crypto component to it, really, at the end of the day, it's just not anything, it's just not something that's really gonna catch on, okay? Now, to show you how expensive this lawsuit is, it started February 2nd, 2023, and obviously it kind of pretty much is dead in the water October 29th, 2025, which is, I guess, why I'm making this video right now, because it mostly seems the project is over. So this is a, again, motion to dismiss, where an actual, recommendation or report in August 28th was pretty much, from my understanding, finalized. Now, this is a big 26-pager that you can dig out and read for yourself, but it pretty much brings up some actual issues in this case. Now, of course, reminder, within 30 days, I think they can appeal the actual motion to dismiss, but ultimately, I think they've all spent so much money on this case at this point that it might be better to let the project die in the state that it is. So some of the issues brought into this was obviously the jurisdiction of every single one of these plaintiffs. They say 137 of the 140 plaintiffs claim to not have any connection to the state of Texas, which is where this lawsuit was kind of brought in, let alone a significant one, such as that applying Texas law to these claims would actually violate due process. And that was argued by the lawyers representing Logan Paul. Now, one of the big things was also that they never actually, satisfied the legal definition of a security. Now, again, when you're getting sued or whenever there's like a law that, or anytime you're actually interpreting it, the thing about it is like law is interpreted in so many ways, right? Like a lawyer can really look at a word, can really look at definitions, can really look at phrasings, and the interpretation is what is usually challenged in a courtroom. It is by far one of the, it's the reason why you're paying these guys the big bucks, right? Because if they can sway the judge, if they can sway the jury in some cases with the gift of the gab or the way that they can present these interpretations, it really does change the way the law kind of works. So when they brought it up to the actual Howey test in this situation, the lawyers said when it came to the third prong, a reasonable expectation of profits to be derived from the entrepreneurial or managerial efforts of others. So this inquiry is objective. It asks what a reasonable purchaser would have understood from the promoter's public representations about the assets. Cryptozoo and its co-founders did not promote Cryptozoo as an investment vehicle. They touted the project as a game developed by artists that would be fun and that the kids love to play. Nor did they publicize the project as one that would bring profits. But again, you could argue that even the clip that I played from the Impulsive podcast where they're talking about, hey, it's a game that could make you money. Some could consider that as an investment, but Logan's lawyers argued that, no, it's just a game, guys. In fact, they don't even really bring up that mention over here. Now, of course, this is all kind of irrelevant in this point because one of the things that I saw reported from sites like Dexerto was that apparently TMZ was saying that the actual case was dismissed. Coming from the attorney for Paul, like Jeff Neiman, who said the district judge reaffirmed the ruling, holding once again that no reasonable juror could find Logan Paul's statements misleading or fraudulent. Now, this is rather interesting because this is the actual document, the report and recommendations of the U.S. magistrate judge. So what's interesting over here is they say that the defendants, right, the claims against the defendant Levin and Bentov, be dismissed without prejudice. So without prejudice, meaning in this case that they can actually amend and come back, which is a pretty important point that should be raised over here. Now, you can't expect a journalist on the internet to necessarily research everything appropriately. So again, when I actually went into the documentation, the report and recommendation, which again was signed by Judge Ronald Griffin, of course, let's kind of read this together, okay? So here, in an effort to rebuke plaintiff's breach of contract, both express and implied, defendant Paul highlights each purchaser of Cryptozoo products agreed to the terms and conditions. And Cryptozoo, not defendant Paul, was a party to the TNC, thus he cannot be held to have breached contracts to which he was not a party. But of course, when you go down a little bit further over here, they do talk about the complaint pointing to a variety of statements defendant Paul personally made, including that the game was completed and tested in 2021. Cryptozoo is a really fun game that makes you money, and the project is backed by a massive team. So of course, then in 2024, defendant Paul came clean. The game never existed and would never be released. Cryptozoo would not make consumers money, and the project was not backed by a massive team. The court believes in making the statements in 2021, knowing they were untrue, as evidenced by his 2024 alleged admission, defendant Paul's purpose was dishonest, and he acted with the intent to deceive plaintiffs into purchasing Cryptozoo products. Accordingly, plaintiffs have adequately pled the first requirement, actual fraud. So yeah, this is a massive 75-page document that obviously contains a lot of extra, goodies. But of course, I thought that that was arguably one of the most hard-hitting points from this document. And of course, I don't think it necessarily means that Logan is a clean individual, but I feel like for a lot of people just saying that this is a thrown-out case, when in reality, it seems a lot of things have been thrown out without prejudice, meaning that, again, if the party suing wants to keep pumping money into this, they can re-amend and hit once more. So it's not necessarily a dead case, but I personally think so much money has been spent into this that at this point, they're probably both looking to mediate in some case, which is kind of usually how most of these cases, I think, end up going, right? Like, they end up just settling this out. Now, to give you guys a bit of a closing remark regarding this, I don't know how much of a win any of this really is for Logan Paul. The more I read about it, yeah, obviously this one movement is definitely in favor of Logan. But I think reading some of the words from the actual judge involved didn't really paint a pretty picture for Logan's conduct throughout Cryptozoo. But then again, obviously in this case, I'm not a lawyer, and I'm sure like actual real lawyers probably have a different take than I do. But just looking at this the way that it is, you know, one thing that really hits me is how much this stuff really isn't ever going to get picked up by the government, right? We live in a day and age when the President of the United States is involved in meme currencies. You know, there's other cases right now where obviously even like the First Lady of the United States, Melania Trump, has been called in a lawsuit, or at least mentioned in lawsuits regarding some of the tokens that were distributed under her likeness, like earlier this year. And, you know, honestly, like the amount of money over here doesn't even raise that much of an attention, like with the U.S. government, right, or the federal government or whatever. You know, even when you go to the individual states, there's obviously bigger fish to fry. It really feels like the last few years, when you're looking at how influencers have kind of dumped some of these shitty projects onto their audiences, it really just feels like no matter what, you can just get by without any actual punishment. I mean, honestly, like, I think Coffeezilla would just say, like, crime is legal, or I think that's like the general understanding. But honestly, at this point, I think most of the people that we've looked at who have been in that NFT, been in that crypto space, have kind of pretty much just gotten away with it. I mean, when some of the biggest players in the game, you know, are reaching pardon status, right, with the U.S. federal government, you know, really everybody underneath that is just easily going to be able to, like, float by. But you know what, honestly, like, with all of this considered, Logan Paul, to me, personally, is still just a scummy person. And I don't think that this project was ever really intended with good intentions at the end of the day. But hey, that's just one man's opinion. Ladies and gentlemen, if you like what you saw, please like, comment, and subscribe. Just like if you dislike it, I